What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. I would like to discuss three of the greatest black light heavyweights of all times, in my opinion, right here on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Let's talk about Ezzard Charles and Archie Moore and the great Jimmy Bivins. Now let's start the conversation off with Ezzard Mac Charles. He was known as the Cincinnati Cobra. Born July 7th, 1921 in Lawrence, Georgia. He would die May 28th, 1975 in Chicago, Illinois, and he would pass through Cincinnati, Ohio. He stood 6 foot and had a 73-inch reach with a record of 121 total bouts, 75 wins, 52 knockouts. He was stopped just a few times. Had 25 losses and 1 draw. I'm going to tell you what's special to me about Ezzard Mac Charles as this conversation continues. But let's discuss his amateur career. 42-0. He fought from 1937 to 1939 as an amateur. Won the Cincinnati Golden Gloves, the Ohio District AAU Championships, National AAU Championships, Diamond Belt Welterweight Championships, 1937 to 1938. He would win the State AAU Welterweight Championships from 1937 to 1938. Chicago Golden Gloves Welterweight Championships in 1938. Diamond Belt Middleweight Championships in 1939, the Golden Glove Middleweight Championships in 1939, the State AAU Middleweight Championships, and a professional career would begin shortly after. Now, what's special about Ezzard Mac Charles? He would run across fighters such as Walker Smith, a.k.a. Sugar Ray Robinson, and many others during his amateur reign. He sparred with Ray Robinson when he was a middleweight and Ray Robinson was just a lightweight. But when you look at Ray Robinson, and you look at Ezzard Charles, and you look at Ike Williams and Jimmy Bivins, these are some greats that were turned professional in 1940, and we will get to that as this conversation will continue. Now, Ezzard Charles was quite a fighter. He'd be in the ring with the likes of Jimmy Bivins and Joey Maxim, Booker Beckworth and Archie Moore, Gus Lesnevich and Elmer Violent Ray, Joe Baskey and Teddy Uroth, Pat Valentino and Jersey Joe Walcott, Lee Omar, Rex Lane, Tommy Jackson, his name was the Hurricane, Johnny Holman and Gus Lesnevich, Rocky Marciano twice in 1954, Charlie Burley and Paul Andrews, Harold Johnson and Pat Valentino, just to name a few. So when you look at Ezzard Charles and you want to break down his career, you have to understand the time in which the man came, the opponents he was in a ring with, the opportunities he may or may not have had. He was in the ring with some of the greatest black murderous road fighters and did a great job doing so. Ezzard Charles, what a fascinating fighter. Now let's take a look at Jimmy Bivins, James Lewis Bivins. He was born December 6, 1919 in Dry Branch, Georgia. He would die July 4th, 2012. He was 92 years of age at the time of his rest. And he would rest in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, I want to give you a footnote here. Ohio had some of the greatest light heavyweights of, at that time, modern time, at that time. You had Ezzard Charles, who was from Cincinnati, Ohio. I don't know if I said Cleveland, but he was from Cincinnati, Ohio. You had Jimmy Bivins from Cleveland, Ohio. You had Joey Maxim, who was from Ohio as well. You had a fighter by the name of Harry Bobo, also from Ohio. Then you had another fighter who was unfortunately in an accident in the ring with Ezzard Charles in 1948. And his name was Sammy Baruti. All those Ohio boys were outstanding in the light heavyweight division. Now, Jimmy Bivins would win the duration light heavyweight and heavyweight championship titles. He'd be in the ring himself with Milo Patina, Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepard, Joey Maxim and Lloyd Marshall, Tammy Mariello and Gus Lesnevich, Leonard Marrow and Clarence Henry, Willie Beam and Coley Wallace, Nady Bolden and Bob Baker, Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepard, if I did not already mention him, Tommy Harrison, and Lisa Boyd, Bob Pastor and Billy Conn, and Harold Johnson and Ezzard Charles, Archie Moore and Billy Sues, Lee Q. Murray and Watson Jones, Jersey Joe Walcott, Booker Beckworth, Buddy Knox, and Aaron Williams, Tony Musto, Charlie Burley, Sid Peaks, Tommy Harrison, Lou Franklin, just to name a few. If I didn't mention Billy Conn, he was in the ring with Billy Conn as well. Jimmy Bivins would also, along with Ezzard Charles, turn professional in 1940. What a fascinating fighter Jimmy Bivins was. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He lived a tragic life towards the ending of his career, and he was found dead, wrapped up in a carpet, if you will, in the attic. And I'll spare the details of his findings, but Jimmy Bivins was, to me, the top class of the light heavyweights during that era. He could beat everybody. He would be champion today. He was a two-fisted puncher, a masterful boxer. And he was in the ring with all of the fighters during that era of significance. I already explained to you who he was in the ring with, the fights that he had with them, the conditions that Ezzard Charles and Jimmy Bivins, as well as Archie Moore, was in. You see, Ezzard Charles and Archie Moore were middleweights up until 1944. And Tony Zale refused to give middleweights opportunities who were black. Anton Christopheridis, Billy Conn, all refused to give black fighters opportunities for their titles. So the Black Murderers Row would form at a middleweight division, and they had to fight amongst themselves. There are many stories of the Black Murderers Row, but I can tell you from personal experience of the research that I have done, that the Black Murderers Row, the 8 men that's always mentioned, there were more men than he ate in that Black Murderers Row, but you only hear about 8 of them. But you had other fighters that did not get the opportunities, that were avoided. Since we're on the short topic of Black Murderers Row, there's a lot of missing information that should really be mentioned. How these fighters were paid to take dives. Watson Jones had 7 recorded dives that were made in his career. Men that he could beat, he had to take dives for. Charlie Burley's name is mentioned often because he was the one that refused to take dives. He spared up on some fighters because that's the only way you can get fights during that time. I mentioned in a video with Henry Armstrong, just to bring it back full circle. Henry Armstrong made a deal with Seferino Garcia's people. They carried the fight from New York to California, and Henry Armstrong was offered money that he refused, but he accepted a portion of the money that he was offered to carry Seferino Garcia, and that's the reason why the bout went the entire 4 rounds, because he was paid not to stop him. And for that reason, they were able to hire a fighter by the name, or I should say, a trainer by the name of George Blake. And George Blake knew the score. He had to take away 5 rounds because Henry Armstrong was not going to knock out Seferino Garcia, because if he did, he wouldn't make it home. They would have a switchblade in the shower waiting for him. And that's the way it was during that time. So once Henry Armstrong knew that he'd been played, he had to carry out the fight. And George Blake would take away 5 rounds from Henry Armstrong just to go the distance, only to become a draw. And this is what happened to a lot of the fighters during that time and beyond. But with the Black Murderers Row, they were threatened. Their lives were at stake. They had guns pointed to their head if they didn't follow instructions. Charlie Burley could have knocked out many men that he was in the ring with. Ezzard Charles and Archie Moore could have as well. But you also had Alan Faulkner. You had Joe Blackwood. Alan Faulkner was from Buffalo, New York. Joe Blackwood was from Philadelphia. You had O'Neill Bell from Detroit. You had many of them. Oakland Billy Smith, Broadway Oakland Billy Smith from California. He wasn't from California, but he did most of his career in the West Coast. But you had so many of these men who unfortunately just didn't get the opportunities that they so rightly deserve. And Archie Moore and Ezzard Charles were just two of those men, along with Jimmy Bivins, that was treated horribly. And they did not get the fair of opportunity. Moore did in 52, and Charles did in 49. Let's continue our conversation with these great men. Ezzard Charles, the Cincinnati Cobra, was in a ring with Charlie Burley, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Fought him twice and defeated him twice. June 29th of 42, you had 4,200 spectators that showed up at the Hickory Park in Melville, Pennsylvania. The referee was Red Robinson. He awarded a 10-round decision to Ezzard Charles, who was 20 years old at that particular time. And Archie Moore had heard about that contest. He wanted to take on Charlie Burley. And Archie Moore would once say, when asked later on, Charlie Burley was the toughest fighter that he was in a ring with. I spoke about Ray Robinson briefly and the Henry Armstrong conversation. And many people don't quite understand the circumstance surrounding Ray Robinson and the Black Murderers Row. They read and they hear and they follow. What they have to understand is that Ray Robinson was lied to when he was offered an opportunity when he was a lightweight. He was not ranked in the lightweight division in the top 10, but he was a phenomenon. When he turned professional October 4th of 1940, the majority of spectators came to see Ray Robinson's professional debut because Ray Robinson was the talk of the town and the amateurs in Harlem, New York. I mentioned to you that he had sparred with Ezzard Charles. So when Ray Robinson was promised an opportunity to face Sammy Aingot for his title, Sammy Aingot and his outfit had promised George Gangford and Ray Robinson a fair opportunity, although Ray Robinson was not ranked in the top 10. But as I was speaking to you before about Ray Robinson starting his professional debut on October 4th, 1940 on the undercard of Henry Armstrong and Fizzy Zivit. The majority of spectators came to see Ray Robinson because Ray Robinson was a commodity. He was something that you've never seen before in the amateurs. He had sparred with Ezzard Charles in the amateurs. And everyone knew who Ray Robinson was before he turned professional. You see, he won the Bantamweight Championship title, the Metropolitan version of that, in the AAU competitions in New York. And that hasn't been done before. The last time it was done was 10 years before that, 1928. And it was in the middleweight division. It was a fighter by the name of the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith. Harry Smith is my favorite middleweight champion in boxing history. He's my number one. But Ezzard Charles was dominating the middleweight division during his era in the amateurs. And Ray Robinson was looked at as the next superstar. So when the promoter had realized that Henry Armstrong and Fizzy Zivit, they were not selling as well. The tickets were not selling as well as they anticipated. They brought in Ray Robinson and gave him an opportunity to be on that card. And he turned professional on the undercard. He was the first bout. And that was the first time a black fighter had opened up the garden. And with Ray Robinson, he was cheated of an opportunity, not so much that he deserved because he wasn't ranked as a lightweight, but he was promised the opportunity. And Sammy Aingott came in weighing 136 pounds, which means that the title would not be on the line. And then when they investigated to see exactly what really took place, Sammy Aingott would eventually retire and he would come back, because when you retired, all the investigation stops. And when you make a comeback, you can make a comeback as a person who would be in line for a title shot. So when he would come back, he would take on another black fighter. And his name was Luther Slugger White. And he would defeat Luther Slugger White. And he would become lightweight champion once again. But then once again, he would wind up retiring. And that's when Tippy Larkin and Bo Jack would fight for his title. It was supposed to be Ali Stoltz, but Bo Jack would get rid of Ali Stoltz. So then Bo Jack would be in line to face Tippy Larkin. This is in 43. And he would stop him in 2 rounds. And then Bo Jack would become the New York SAC lightweight champion. But to get back with these 3 great light heavyweights, Ezzard Charles and Archie Moore were the 2 black middleweights at the time. And they were along with the Black Murderers Row. But these 2 men would eventually get a title. That's why they're not considered Black Murderers Rows. And they were really destructing everything in their path. So Archie Moore and Ezzard Charles were fascinating fighters. But Jimmy Bivins would have his wars with Ezzard Charles. Charles would defeat Charlie Burley once again in 10 rounds. This time it would be at the Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The referee was Buck McClellan. He would raise the hand once again of Ezzard Charles. And this time, both men would shell out and be paid $31,686 with 12,134 spectators in the house. And Charlie Burley would weigh 155 pounds, and Ezzard Charles would weigh 152 pounds. You see, during that time, boxing was boxing. Every fight was a pay-per-view fight today during that time. And it was just to be expected. It wasn't looked at as a superstar fight. It was business as usual. Now, to give you an idea of the career of Jimmy Bivins, Jimmy Bivins would face fighters such as Charlie Burley, Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepard, Watson Jones, Lloyd Marshall, Lee Q. Murray, Archie Moore, Jersey Joe Walcott, and Ezzard Charles. Between September 3rd, 1940, when he turned professional, he would take on Milo Patina, who stood 5 foot 10 inches. He was a southpaw and won the light heavyweight championship title, and defeating Tiger Jack Fox. He did all this work between September 3rd, 1940 and February 3rd, 1942. When Tiger Jack Fox was in the ring with Milo Patina on February 3rd of 1931, Billy Conn would defeat Milo Patina July 13th of 1939. And that happened because another black light heavyweight champion, John Henry Lewis, would be stripped of his title because of an eye examination test that he didn't pass. And so since he did not face Tiger Jack Fox, they would strip him of one of his two titles. And so Milo Patina and Tiger Jack Fox would fight for one, and Billy Conn would face Milo Patina for the second one. Billy Conn had defeated Bob Pastor from the Bronx, New York. Jimmy Bivens would also take on Joey Maxim, June 22nd, 1942. 10 rounds in Cleveland, Ohio. He would take on Gus Lesnievich, March 11th, 1942. 10 rounds, he would defeat him in Cleveland, Ohio. He would take on Archie Moore, August 22nd of 1945. He would score a 6-round knockout in Cleveland, Ohio. September 8th, 1947. He was KO'd 9 rounds in Baltimore. June 28th of 1948. He would lose in 10 rounds in Baltimore, Maryland. September 11th from 1949. He would take on Lee Savoy, November 27th from 1942. 10 rounds in New York, Madison Square Garden. He'd be in the ring with Billy Conn. He'd be in the ring with Harold Johnson. He'd be in the ring with Billy Seuss. January 13th of 42. 10 rounds. He would defeat him in Cleveland, Ohio. He would take on Jersey Joe Walcott, February 25th of 46. He would lose to him in 10 rounds in Cleveland, Ohio. Take on Ezzard Charles, January 7th of 1943. He would lose to him in 10 rounds in Cleveland, Ohio. November 12th of 46, would lose to him in 10 rounds in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. March 10th, he'd be KO'd by. But the thing with Jimmy Bivens, you couldn't keep a good man down. He would whip most of the fighters during his day, including Ezzard Charles, included Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepard, who he fought July 26th of 45 in Ford's Field in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, including Oakland Billy Smith. Fought him for 10 rounds January 30th of 46 at the Olympic Auditorium in Oakland, California. He would take on Watson Jones. He would stop him in 6 rounds January 7th of 46 at the Civic Auditorium in California. Ezzard Charles would face Archie Moore, May 5th, 1947 at the Music Hall Arena in Cincinnati, Ohio. The referee was Tony Wardell, and he would award Ezzard Charles a 10-round victory over Archie Moore. Ezzard Charles weighed 173 pounds and Archie Moore weighed 172 pounds. If my memory serves me correctly, the place was packed. Most of the spectators in Ohio wanted to see the match between Archie Moore and Ezzard Charles. Now, if you look at a fight like that today, that would be, let's say, in the heavyweight division, that would have been Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, when those two names were on the top of the market. Both men had championship titles. This is the type of buzz you had during that time with Ezzard Charles and Archie Moore. And either one of those men were champions at that time. You didn't have to be, because of the reputation that you would have during your reign. And you're putting two great fighters up against one another, and they would fight several times. They would run it back almost immediately. When Ezzard Charles exploded body shots to Archie Moore understood what those punches meant. Ezzard Charles would defeat Archie Moore for the third time, and it would be the final time, January 13th of 48 in Cleveland Arena in Ohio. Referee this time was Jackie Davis, and he would award Ezzard Charles the victory. 2 minutes and 40 seconds of the 8th round. Archie Moore would be stopped. Both men would split 2 rounds. But after that, it would be all Ezzard Charles. You had 8,334 spectators in the audience. Collectively, they would pay $38,920 to see those two men scrap for the third and final time. Both men would become two great legendary fighters. Charles would defeat Jersey Joe Walcott, 15 rounds, June 22nd of 1949 in Comiskey Park. The contest took place in Chicago, Illinois, and the referee was Davey Miller. It would be in front of 7,273 spectators. It would be for the vacant NBA version of the World Heavyweight Championship crown. It was vacated by 25 title defenses, 12-year reign bomber, Joe Louis. 25,932 spectators would collectively pay $246,546 to see that contest. Walcott weighed 196 pounds and Ezzard Charles weighed 182 pounds. Ezzard Charles would defeat Walcott for the second time, March 7, 1941 at the Olympic Stadium in Detroit. The contest would take place in Michigan, 15 rounds. The referee was Clarence Rosen. He would proclaim that Ezzard Charles would defeat Jersey Joe Walcott. These men would be paid $75,502 in front of 13,853 spectators. What was amazing about this fight was that Charles was a 5-1 favorite. See, these are the kind of numbers that you look at when men are fighting one another. They develop a reputation. It didn't matter whether you had an O on your record or you had 10 losses. The fact that you came to fight, the audience didn't know whether you could win that evening or you would lose once again. They didn't know whether or not the crowd favorite would bring the victory home. Because both men were very tough and both men were very hungry. And their pride and joy was having their arm raised. When these men trained in the gymnasiums, it was a big deal for them to show up and show out. They loved what they did. Hitting the speed bag, hitting the heavy bag, skipping rope, hearing the sounds of the bell in sparring sessions. The smell of a gym. When they walked into the locker room, it was like a party. Some of the fighters that they had faced would be in that locker room. Fighters who came out of town would be in that locker room. And they would talk about their own fights. Man, you hit me good with that body shot, man. I got to sharpen up on that. The other fighter might tell him, yeah, man, you got to shorten up your jab. I noticed you were dropping hands every time. You'll be all right. And these two men meet once again down the line. And that's how the game was. That's how fighters respect one another. When you look at these records, they didn't see those records at that time as you see them today. When you see 50-0 or 51-0, you have to look at the time in which that record was made, the fighters and opponents that was during that time, what arenas they fought in, were there same-day weigh-ins, were there 15 rounds attached to those 51-0. You have to look at all those things and take them under consideration. Now, Jersey Joe Walcott would eventually defeat Ezzard Charles. He would stop him in 7 rounds. It was scheduled for 15. July 18th for 51. And it was an upset. Forbes Field, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Basically the backyard of Ezzard Charles. He would basically do a backflip. Tried to get up and couldn't. It would be for Ezzard Charles' NBA heavyweight championship crown. 55 seconds of the 7th round in front of 28,272 spectators. They had paid collectively 24,000. No, I think it was 245,000, if I'm correct, at Forbes Field. And these men were the top names during that era. Now, Walcott was 37 years old, and he would be the oldest fighter at that time to win a championship. He cracked him with a 45 uppercut. And Ezzard Charles landed basically right in his own corner. Ezzard Charles's jaw was somewhat fractured from that punch. The next time Ezzard Charles would get a big fight would be in 1954 against Rocky Marciano. He would fight him twice that year. He would lose on a decision in the first fight and be stopped in the second fight. But the beating that Ezzard Charles would suffer against Rocky Marciano was one of the reasons why I often say, when it's time for a fighter to hang him up, it's time for a fighter to hang him up. Jimmy Bivins, Ezzard Charles, and Archie Moore, three of the greatest light heavyweights of all times. Archie Moore would end his career with a record of 220 total bouts, 199 wins, 35 losses, 145 knockouts. He had 1,472 rounds under his belt with a 60% knockout streak. He fought from 1935 to 1963. He would have both his titles, the NBA and the New York Sack, stripped from him. And Harold Johnson, who had been in the ring with Archie Moore a total of 6 times, would win 1 and Moore would win 5. Harold Johnson would be stopped. And that was one of the most brutal knockouts during that time. Archie Moore, Ezzard Charles, Jimmy Bivins. Thanks for listening. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights, all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thanks for listening. And see you on the next video.